They actually built, they're actually, this has been installed in Shanghai. Excuse me. So this is done basically for air quality. Can you believe that they did this? I think it's amazing. Excuse me. So where are we globally? The bad and the good news is globally, 25% of our land is degraded, which gives us a lot of potential. So that's the good news, right? Approximately 30% of the CO2 in the atmosphere today is attributed to soil degradation. And so we talk a lot about emissions, and yeah, emissions are really important, but I feel like we need to bring to the table and bring greater awareness to the contribution that soil degradation in rural areas and in urban areas is contributing to greenhouse gases. Research shows that the world soil still sequesters, even now, approximately 25% of the emissions. So that's good news. And there's a theory out there, and it's been tossed around, and there are so many papers that go back and forth, but I'm an optimist, so I'm sharing this. An approximate 2% soil organic matter increase worldwide may remove the excess CO2 within 10 years. And I really have a sense that as we start building with these systems and working with them to improving and managing them, that we're going to see some synergistic benefits that can't really be modeled when we try to separate and tease out the ecosystem services and the sources. So for the hill country, we have a lot of information out there that the hill country folks can use on agriculture lands, right? And we all know that turning farmland into forest or prairies will increase your carbon storage capacities. What we don't have, and the more I even went out and looked again this week, is that we still don't have a whole lot of data for urban areas. But working with the NRCS and having some concept of the topic, what I think we can assume is, and initially, new development soils would have very little soil carbon remaining. Note the image to the right of this slide. This is actually in San Antonio. This was an article in the Express News about the variances being given to our tree preservation ordinance. As you can see, there would be very little soil carbon. We actually have developers who have taken the rule that the San Antonio water system has, that you have to put 4 inches of soil underneath turf grass for new residential development, right? So what they're doing is they're taking limestone and crushing it up and calling it soil. Yep, so we're going to have to work a little bit with all kinds of different areas. And that's kind of what GIA does. We find out, oh my God, now we got to address this. Okay, now we need to go over there and see how we can improve this situation. But eventually, what the NRCS has found in some of its initial soil carbon inventory results is that over time, residential properties have a tendency to increase their soil carbon stocks. But of course, this depends on climate and maintenance practices. For most commercial properties, the soil will remain low in carbon, and this is due to the design of the site and to maintenance practices. So evaluating how to make the most of land conservation. What are the most important lands to conserve? How should they be managed? What are some new mechanisms to promote land conservation and enhancements to increase the services they provide? Here's a nice photo of the Devil's River, one of my favorite rivers. So this is kind of, it gives you some baseline information. We spent a lot of time, my interns were great in going out and collecting this information from research papers, but it was very difficult to do apples and apples. Again, this is kind of emerging research tech information, but what we could glean, and we tried to get information from areas that were close or similar to South Texas. So we didn't go up to Oregon and collect data or to the tropics. But typically what we could look at is that our typical turf and lawns can sequester approximately somewhere around can net a ton of carbon. Prairies, not much more, which I was surprised. And if you can help me with some additional papers that show more, I would really, really appreciate it. Forest and trees, about the same, but look at the active riparian and floodplain forests. Wow, this is major. And the wetlands, of course, depending on their depth and where they are and how they're managed, but we have a great potential there. Lid features, we don't really have a whole lot of information on net carbon storage, but we do have it for stormwater runoff and sediment removal. So looking at these three ecosystem services, this gives us some ideas of what our priorities are. And of course, hey, it's what you always expected. There's no surprises here. Riparian areas and wetlands have the most potential for providing ecosystem services. But as we all scramble, especially everybody in the land conservation area, to make the most of what is available, all open space becomes really valuable, and anything we can do will have value. And this is really proved, I think, is is in looking at what we are able to estimate. And again, these are just estimations for parks. These are public green spaces. Our Parks Department is in charge of the Aquifer Protection Program and with the city parks. So even though these are estimates, we're looking at a 1% increase, so that we're looking at maximizing at least 1 ton of carbon stored per acre. And this isn't anything to laugh at. I mean, when we add the aquifer protection stats acreage in, we're looking at 31 billion gallons of water and a whole lot of carbon stored. And to look at that carbon that's stored, that's pulling out about 3.67 tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's equivalent to the emissions of about 130 automobiles every year. So it does have some potential. And then when you start adding in schools, business campuses, college campuses, there's a whole lot of that can be done within our limited urban area. So it's felt, and this is GIA is getting ready to enter a different phase of working with parks on developing some pilot projects. Parks feels, and we feel that we'll be able to, just by reaching a low-hanging fruit on the branch, changing and modifying some maintenance practices to increase our soil organic matter. And that this will assist in, enhancing those services and also meeting our city's climate action goals. And as you can see, our maintenance contractors might be cutting the grass just a little short, right? And then we get to some of our creek areas and our parks areas. It's going to take more than just modifying vegetation and soil management practices here. We'll be looking at some serious restoration that's required and changing some land development codes to protect what we put into place here. So again, how do we work together in the land conservation alliances to sell our story, to make this work for us? And I think that one of the things that we've decided, we've got to collect the data for our area. And that means for South Central Texas, Hill Country, our different ecosystems, the different ecoregions, the Edwards Plateau, the Blackland Prairies, and of course for San Antonio, the South Texas Plains. And all of these will have their different stormwater runoff data, baseline soil carbon, etc. And then improving the valuation of what can be realized as we manage the soil and plants on our property, to improve that through better software that can be used in a watershed modeling, and promote the integration of system thinking in public policies, regulations, incentives, and project selection. And then increasing awareness of the development impact on ecosystem services. That again, these are a public good. And how do we improve the balance between economic development and what the public's losing? And ensure what rules are in place are enforced, especially for riparian and wetland protection. And let me cast your mind over here to this image. I want you to know that that is a federally protected wetland in the city of San Antonio. Yes, this is how we treat our wetlands here in San Antonio. And it took me a while, but I finally tracked down the Corps of Engineer person that was responsible for issuing this permit without any mitigation. So this improvement is taking more than half of the remaining wetland that was already impacted by the lows on the other side. I've been working with the supervisor and now with an inspector and requesting that the city actually mitigate this impact and within their permit. We'll see what happens. I've only been working on it for 2.5 months, so who knows? So increasing regulation as needed to realize public goals as reflected in public documents is going to be crucial, especially in Comal County, as you guys are getting so slammed by new development. And anything I can do to assist in that, please don't hesitate to call. So I just want to throw this out because, you know, I worked for the city for 12 years in development services, and I worked with 4 different public works directors, and every one of them said, Debbie, we want to help private property owners, you know, squeeze down the floodplain and be able to make better use of their property so we can increase the tax base. I was so delighted to be introduced to this man's work from the Mile High Flood District. He actually did the calculation. Note on the left is the development and how they were allowed to squeeze down the floodplain. So this new infrastructure, as seen on the right, is turned over to the city by the developer. The city is responsible for maintaining it in perpetuity and has a lifetime, maybe 100, maybe 150 years. But eventually the city or the taxpayers will be responsible for replacing it, right? And this guy actually calculated, okay, from that increased tax base that we got from that little bit of land that we allowed to be filled in, it would only take 17,000 years to pay for the replacement of this structure. So I think this is an important message that when we get told these type of policies or stories that we have the data to back up, no, that doesn't work, to help change those policies. So under today's legal system, unfortunately, it appears that taxpayers will have to fund the loss of economic gain that a property owner may experience. Regulations can only go so far. And again, I thank my interns for being able to uncover so much data on this. Currently, ecosystem services and even benefits to human health have not been enough to change court decisions, especially and even at the Supreme Court level. In San Antonio, residents support land conservation along with its trees and vegetation and soils through their planning documents and development codes. Voters have actually voted to be taxed in order to provide aquifer protection and to conserve the natural floodplain for creek trailways. And I want to look at, I know in San Antonio, what we do is usually replicated in other municipalities, but we feel in San Antonio that there should be additional funding provided by the city's MS4 permit requirements, which is a federal permit that is for water quality and stormwater discharges. The county collects flood control dollars with our property taxes, and we feel that land conservation should be a part of this also, not just going into the floodplain and digging a big hole. State agencies such as the Texas Water Development Board, and of course, federal agency such as the Corps of Engineers, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the EPA are all potential funding sources as we move forward, promoting land conservation. So once it's protected, how do we enhance? What are some of the strategies? So properties managed with few inputs have the smallest carbon footprint, right? And ecosystem types used together can provide greater benefits. So this is again taken from a lot of research papers. We know that a grassy filter strip before a forested area will increase reduction of sediment better than just a forest. We know that a complex vegetative cover, such as trees with understory plants, reduces stormwater runoff better than trees alone and increases water storage and carbon sequestration while reducing albedo more effectively. This just totally blew me away that reflective albedo is more effective with not just a forest or not just trees covering a parking lot, but understory plants mixed in there. The deeper a wetland is, the more effective it is. Prairies designed with plants that better utilize above ground and below ground spaces can increase services. Minimum inputs such as mowing less and leaving vegetation higher while keeping the ground covered increases potential with minimal inputs. And then there's those strategies that can increase functionality and resilience, but require inputs. The basic restoration of streams, rivers, and uplands, increase of water capture with bioswales and terracing on the contour, creation of infiltration sites, which can be called stormwater detention sites, and we can manage those in a better way to enhance them. For riparian areas, creating and enhancing overbanking areas as infiltration sites to reduce stormwater runoff, increase filtration, and slow recharge of stream flows. And integrating flood control projects with land conservation and restoration. This is really crucial. It is important to note enhancements will need to be protected from not only current flows, but also from future upstream flows. And so while flood control projects, and I learned this by sitting on the Drainage Bond Committee for San Antonio, while flood control projects tend to be placed at the bottom in the floodplain at the bottom of the watershed, land conservation locations and riparian restorations may be best located at the top of the watershed and working your way down. Bottom line, it is difficult to do any of this without a master plan and a lot of buy-in from a lot of different agencies and folks. And this will include detailed hydrological modeling with better plant soil interactions. So in summary, I bet you're glad to hear this. In summary, land conservation provides the ecosystem services, which again, I won't go through all of these, but we know that this is what the residents, citizens, the public actually receive without, there's no injustice or equity. Of course, everybody gets to benefit. And the injustice and equity comes to how close you live to in proximity to some of these green spaces. And I think that's one of the crucial things for us to look at as we go forward and doing land conservation and reaching down into some of those underserved areas, especially those at the bottom of our watersheds that have so much flooding issues. So with that, I have a few references that I know will excite you because I can tell all of you are as big a soil nerds as me. But reading this book has helped spark my inspiration. And sometimes I feel like a born again soil person. But again, also look at our Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And I know that was a lot. We probably should have taken a break, but I'm open to any questions.
Wow, thank you, Debbie. That was fascinating. I guess I enjoyed it so much that means I'm a soil nerd too.
I'm in good company.
We need it. Yeah, we need another whoop call for soil nerds.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if we've got any questions in the chat. I haven't seen any really. I think we're all still digesting. That was fabulous. There was so much detail in here. I was trying to take notes, but I'm going to go back and review this presentation, watch the recording again. Does anybody have any questions? Type them into the chat real quick if you do. Or let's see if we could do a hand show here. If anybody wants to raise their hand and propose a question. Let me see if I can get my full. Jane, can you see everybody? So you could see a raised hand if it were there?
No, but I have a question.
Okay.
Could Debbie explain what Atlas 14 is?
Oh, good question, Jane. So every few years, practically every decade now, experts notice that, whoa, our 100-year floods are happening much more frequently, right? And so NOAA has been in charge of collecting climate data. And with this awareness that our flood frequency are increasing, this means that our 100-year floodplain is not accurate anymore. And so what they did is that they went in and we ran the hydrological models with the new frequency event and intensity of events, of storm events with NOAA's data. We ran those models and we went, whoa, our floodplains really need to be widened, the 100-year floodplain. And we can't even imagine what it's going to mean to the 500-year floodplain, which is considered an at-risk area. So Atlas 14, the data has been released. Cities one by one are adopting the Atlas 14, and are now in the process of updating their floodplain maps. So that's going to change, and this is going to change for developers and property owners of how they can use their property.
Wow.
Thank you for that.
Debbie, may I suggest you stop screen sharing, and perhaps that will allow the whole gallery to show. Ah, all right. Mostly marker squares I'm seeing, but if anybody wants to ask a question, you could put your face back up there and raise your hand or just shout out.
Are there any specific grasses or trees that you would recommend for both carbon capture and water retention?
That's a really good question, and that's really one of my favorite topics. But again, it's going to, and I'm a member of the Native Plant Society also, and we really want folks to look at the native plants in their ecosystem. So if you're in the Edwards Plateau, your plants are going to be different than what we're going to use in the Blackland Prairies, right? And of course, in the Blackland Prairies, if you're looking at riparian areas, we're promoting a climax hardwood forest to be the primary ecosystem that's along our riparian areas, and how to manage that. And eventually you're going to have, be able to acquire that closed canopy that stormwater engineers want to reduce, roughness coefficient, so they increase flows. But yeah, your prairie grasses, there's just no way to lose with them, because they have the ability to put those roots down, and they have the more fibrous roots. And my favorite, and then the good news is that it's adaptable to every region across the state, is Eastern Gamma grass. You can't lose with Eastern Gamma grass. And if you need some, I've got some to share. My mother plants just keep putting off children in my yard. Does that answer your question well?
Yes, on the grasses.
Trees. So looking at upland trees. And again, it's good.
Hill country, shallow soil.
And ash juniper gets a really bad rap in the hill country. And yeah, we got too much. And yeah, we need to manage it in a better way. But when I look at the soils that are being created under those ash juniper trees, there's a lot of benefits. So we kind of need to take a look at that, because of the hydro, how the cedar needles will repel water. It really keeps that soil protected so that it can build in place for a longer period of time. So don't drop ash juniper off of your list of upland trees.
Thank you. Yes, I just noticed that on some land I was on, that it was badly eroded, and there were spots around the ash junipers, 2-3 feet, that the soil was in place. It was encouraging grasses to grow. So, okay, yeah, thanks.
Eva, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in your experience, do you feel that engineers such as the Army Corps are migrating towards more natural infrastructure type approaches to flood mitigation? Well, I'll just leave it at that, flood mitigation.
Yes, Eva, I do think there is a general slow migration that way. But again, it depends on what department of the Corps of Engineers you're working with. And I think the most amazing thing is when, the Corps of Engineers went through the country straightening and widening creeks and rivers throughout the country. And then when the water quality issues came up, then they started, I think it was the Kissimmee River in Florida, that was one of the first that they went in and actually paid for doing restoration. And Eva, I want you to know that when the River Authority initiated the Mission Reach restoration, and in partnership with the Corps of Engineers, and we had our first public meetings, I cried. I just cried tears of joy. And to see what has been accomplished down there is just amazing. So yes, I think everywhere, but it's going to take continued public comment and having people like you on the committees that are developing the plans, that create the policies, that eventually create the regulations is just crucial. We have to be that voice in the masses of the engineers, which I work with them, but they just don't have the life science background that you guys have, typically.
Do we have any other questions? I'll point out that Annalisa has put an interesting, oops, did I lose it already? An interesting comment in the chat about now I've lost it already.
Oh, I'll just
Annalisa,
say it. Yeah, on our publications on the Aquafer Alliance website, we have watershed stewardship for the Edwards Aquifer region. That booklet, which is, you can download it for free, has a great planting guide in there. So yeah, if you're wondering about what plants to plant, it has like, all the different factors so that you can choose the best plants, and really pretty pictures.
Thank you for sharing that, Annalisa. Well, I don't see any other hands raised or anything else in the chat. A lot of thank yous coming in though, Debbie. I hope you'll take the time to read those. So thank you again. Thank you from CCCA. Thank you to all of our friends of CCCA who have joined us. And again, I'll remind you to please put your name and email address in the chat if you're not already part of our friends group. And we'll keep you posted and hope to see you again next time. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
And